The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, welcome everyone. We're starting to get attendees showing up. We have about 70 so far. I know we're right on time here at noon, but welcome to Making Teams Work, Understanding the Role of Culture. We've got Josh Bersin, the principal and founder of Bersin, Bersin by Deloitte, and Samar Birwadker, CEO and founder of Good&Co. Today we'll be discussing the growing role of culture in modern business, how to define what culture means in a team, and some of the tools and models you should consider when you're building a high-performing team. We'll give it just a few more minutes. I know we've got a few more who need to sign in, and again, we're right on the time here.
I'd say we should probably start. Are you guys ready? Sean?
Perfect. Josh, why don't you kick it off?
Great. Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. The topic of teams, this is Josh Bersin, and a lot of you probably know who I am. We're going to talk about teams for about an hour, and this is probably the biggest topic in the area of organizational design and HR that I have run into all year. And it's a profound topic. It has many, many implications on business practices, talent practices, recruiting, and we're going to talk about culture. But to get started, what I'd like to do is, and by the way, Samar, Birwadker, and I have met years ago when GoodCo was being formed, and I'm really excited for you to see some of the things that they've been doing in that company, but I'm going to save that to the end, and he's going to give you a presentation a little bit about what they do and how culture fit can be done in a sort of a brand new, very exciting way. But let's talk a little bit about teams in general. We're in the middle, or we're in the early stages of a redefining or redefinition of how organizations work. And it's being driven by several factors, one of which is automation and technology and the interconnectedness that we have in companies. And I don't need to spend a lot of time on AI. It's pretty much in every magazine and every article and every newspaper. But it is coming faster than we even expected. I've been in the technology industry since the 1970s and have never seen such a rapid acceleration of tools that actually work really well. Usually technology is kind of funky for a while and it doesn't work. But what hasn't kept up is the job design and the way we operate our companies in exchange. You can now buy robotic tractors that are basically driven by drones that can fly over the field, identify where furrows should be plowed, where to plant the seeds, monitor the humidity of the soil, create the micro amount of fertilizer that's needed, literally watch the plants grow, visually display when the fruit is ready to be picked, and then pick it, all through technology. And so it's really, and that's happening in pretty much every job, whether it be sales, marketing, engineering, customer service. We're all dealing with this. But our organizations have not figured out how to adapt, and that's what I'm going to talk about for a little while, and then turn it over to Samar. One of the other things that's changed as a result of technology is the ever-increasing role of the people side of business, and I just want to talk about economics for a minute. If you go back in time to the 1950s and 1940s and early back into the 1800s, most of the economic value of companies was physical assets, plant, equipment, oil in the ground, stocks of inventories, or financial capital. all of those other forms of capital have been dwarfed by human capital. Financial capital is actually very cheap right now. You know that, the interest rates are around, I don't know, 1.5% to 2%, depending on how long you want to wait. And what you see on the right is, well, first of all, in the middle, stock market valuation is about 80 to 85% IP brand and services. And you look on the right, that over the last 4 years, the percentage of market capitalization in all industries has gone even further towards what are called intangibles. Intangibles means things you can't measure, that you can't put your hand on and touch. So that's the human capital in business. And while that's gone on, so have the jobs changed. The percentage of jobs that are service related keeps going up every year. Now, we read a lot about the need for engineers and software developers and machine learning specialists and people that do analytics. And those are very, very important roles, and they're growing very rapidly. But that's less than 8% of the workforce. 92 to 93% of the workforce are people who use technology, not people who develop it. And so the way we operate our companies has to adapt to this change. We also are in a very, interesting time in the job market. I don't really think it matters what industry you're in right now. We're in a very tight labor market for jobs and skills. The unemployment rate, if you look at the history here of the unemployment rate, it's almost as low as it's ever been, and it's going down. And the World Economic Forum, some of the economists that spoke there last week, believe that the U.S. unemployment rate will go down to around 3.8%, which if you look at this chart, it really hasn't been at that level except during a war. So I remember vividly myself the 2000 times, around the year 2000 when we were in a similar economic condition. And, it was great for the stock market and it was great for business growth, but it was a horrible time to try to hire people or retain people because there were so many jobs available, salaries were going up, and it was getting harder and harder. And if you look at the data in the little blue box in the upper right there, the indications are that we are just about at that point. The time to hire, the amount of time it takes to get somebody to come and take a job in your company is about as long as it's been since right around the 2000 boom. So we're in a very tight labor market, yet we're not more productive. So the paradox of this is we have incredible technology, unbelievable connectivity tools, instant access to video and communications to anybody in the world at almost no cost. It's almost free. Yet the amount of work that's coming out per hour of effort or per dollar of labor is actually slowing, and it's even slowing more. And economists, including at the World Economic Forum last week, are really puzzled by this. Why is it that with all of these wonderful tools and connectivity systems and business opportunities, we're not getting as much work done? And I'm going to talk about that. And it's all about teams. There's a method to my madness here. The other thing that's happening is we're working more hours. Interestingly enough, I've been studying, and you guys have probably heard me talk about this before, I've been studying employee engagement now since the 2008 recession and really before then, and looking at data from Glassdoor because it's fairly unbiased data. And what you see is that the average employee engagement rating measured by an employee's rating of their employer on a 1 to 5 scale, which is the way Glassdoor does it, has gone from 3.11 at the depth of the recession, when things were pretty bad, to a little bit over 3.2, which is hardly any increase at all. And I would argue that's probably a decrease. People are working more hours. They are stressed out. We have a huge focus on well-being. And essentially what we're finding is that the productivity and the cognitive overload for people at work has gone up to a very, very high level. Now, there are companies that have figured this out. If you look at the employee engagement data, you look at productivity data, you look at growth data, there are a handful of companies in every industry that are very much ahead of the curve. And these are not tech companies. Those companies on the right are not, like Google and Amazon. I mean, those companies are relatively well-run companies too. They're very successful in their industries. But in every industry, there are companies on the right of this curve that are managing to employ people in a way that they're rating their companies at 4, 4.1, 4.2. And what are they doing? What they're doing is they're really focusing on their people, and they have an understanding that their people are their most important asset, and in many ways their people are their product. And if you think about the data that I just showed you about the economy, if you really understand, that innovation, IP, services are your product, and that's what happens when you digitize your business, is you become even more service oriented. The way you treat people, the way you manage people, the way you organize people, the way you hire people becomes your product, your strategy. This is a chart I've used for quite a while, and I update it regularly, and the data actually continues to get even more profound on how much the work environment has been hard on people. And a research report came out in the UK, maybe in the last 30 days, that showed that roughly 30 to 35% of workers today in the UK believe they are operating under high levels of stress at work. Some of that is scheduling stress. They don't have a flexible enough schedule. Some of it is their manager. There's a whole variety of factors behind this, and we have a whole model, that describes that. But the bottom line is it is high, and they are working more hours. I mean, this is a sign that we have to make some changes. When we have all these tools, we're actually working more. We're working at home, we're working at the coffee shop, we're working on the bus, we're working on the train. And there's been plenty of things written about this, about the impact of social networking on our personal lives. This is one of the factors that is forcing us to reorganize our companies around teams. And the other factor that I want to mention before I get into the teams topic is this idea of social connections. A new research report that comes out every year, Edelman, which is a big PR firm, does a study on trust. And I was actually listening to the radio this morning on the way in and heard the latest data. We are living in a world right now where millennials in particular, and really the rest of us in general, are increasingly concerned about the level of citizenship in the culture and the political environment and the social environment we live in. You can look at the data on this chart. It's real data from a massive study that Deloitte does every year, and the new one will be coming out probably around April. And what it shows is that millennials, people in their early 30s and younger, believe that their economic life may be less fortunate than their parents. And so they believe the world is becoming more unfair, and they're asking their jobs, their employers, their CEOs, their executives to behave as good citizens. And that's creating a sense of what I would call social capital in business, and the need for people to be more focused on their communities and the way people work together. And one more piece of data on that I think is fascinating before I get into teams. This is a study that's been done for years on happiness, and it decomposes the contributors of personal happiness. And when these guys have a 10-point scale called the Cantrell ladder, and they ask individuals to rate their happiness on a 1 to 10 scale. And 9 and 10 is very happy, and 6 to 8 is reasonably happy, and 5 and below is unhappy. And they found that there are 4 dimensions to happiness: your health, your life expectancy, your earnings, your income, the amount of money you have. Can you afford to put your kids to school? Can you buy a house? Can you get reasonable clothes and food and so forth? Your sense of social support. Do you have a community? Do you have friends? Do you have a family? And your trust in institutions where you live. And what you can see looking at this data is that if you compare 2016, which is a year or two ago now, but not that different from today, to 2006, in the United States, we've become about 6% less happy. And we lived through the 2008 recession during that time, and then came through this new economic boom. In the Nordic countries, and the Scandinavian, sort of Northern Europe, are about 11% more happy. And if you get into the covers as to why the US is less happy and those countries are more happy, what their research shows is that we're a little bit healthier here. We have a little bit better health care. We're making more money, but we're significantly less socially connected and significantly less confident in the trust of our institutions. And the Edelman data shows the same thing. So that's one of the things that's driving the organization's focus on teams and connectivity and mission and purpose, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, we also know relative to teams that the millennial generation, and probably the Gen Zs, will see the same kind of data, are very interested in their personal work experience. And they think about the experience at work as much as they do about the job and the career. And obviously, everybody wants to make a good earnings and move ahead. But you can see there's some things here that are new. Your teammates, in some ways, are almost as important or more important than your company. When I went to work in the 1970s and early 1980s, you joined a company, and that company took care of you for most of your career, and you pretty much could trust that if you stuck with that company and more or less did as you were asked and were a reasonably good performer, you would have a good career at that company and the company would take care of you. These days, it's less about the company, it's more about the team. People want to be more creative at work. Young people want to learn faster. They want to get feedback more quickly. They may not be as loyal. They have access to LinkedIn and Glassdoor and other tools that didn't exist in the 1970s and 1980s. And so the focus on team is really an existential change in business. People are oftentimes more engaged to their team than they are to their company. There may be some bad things going on in the company that you don't know anything about, and it's not that relevant to you in today's work environment because it's the team that makes a difference. Now, we know this from data. I'm not just making this up. For the last 2 years, and this is going to come out again this year, in the Deloitte Human Capital Trends, we asked over 10,000 people, and in the last year's study it was well over 10,000, to evaluate what were some of the human capital issues in their companies. And the number one issue, or the number one challenge, was the need to redesign the organization to be more agile, to be more responsive, to be more digital, quote unquote. And I mean digital as a verb, not as a noun. And a digital organization is one where people can work on things that they're good at, work in teams that they feel a part of, and over time change and move to another team or another project without having to go through an enormous job change and the risk that maybe it wouldn't work out and I have to leave. I mean, in the older industry organizations, if you changed roles or you changed departments or you changed business functions, it was a one-way trip. If it didn't work out, you weren't going to get your old job back. But today, where teams are being spun up and formed, and they may go on for a few years, maybe it's a product here, I'll talk about different types of teams in a minute, it's much more common. And we need to find ways to optimize organizations around the network of teams. This is the chart we've been using for a couple of years to describe this, but basically what it shows is that even though your ERP system and your job models and your levels and your job titles are designed around the picture on the left, people spend their time in small groups and they work best in small teams. There's actually psychological research that says that the optimal team size is fewer than 7 to 8 people. It's usually more like 4 or 5 people. People spend more time with people who are physically close to them. So organizations are realizing that we do need people to come into the office and physically be co-located. And we also know that our minds, our brains are wired towards smaller numbers of close relationships. We generally have in the human brain, and this is research that was done by MIT, at most we have about 20 or 30 close friends. We might have 100 acquaintances, but we don't really know that many people well because it takes a while to get to know people. So how do we optimize companies around this smaller idea of teams? Now, I won't spend a lot of time on this because I'm actually writing a whole book on this. It'll be out later this year. But there's all sorts of talent practices that are needed. We need to rethink how teams are structured. We need to rethink how we form and develop teams quickly and give organizations better tools. I mean, one of the things we've discovered, and this is where I think GoodCo has such a great opportunity, companies don't have a lot of tools yet on how to form a team, what a team should look like, who should lead the team, how do we measure the team, How do we assemble people into the right combinations into a team? You know, we're very good at that in functional hierarchies. We're actually very good at saying, here's how a sales organization should work, and here's how a customer service organization. But how should the sales account team be structured, and how should we measure it, and how should we reward people, and should there be team rewards versus individual rewards? We're going to be doing a lot of research on this year. Some of this is coming out at our Impact Conference, but you can see there's a lot of things that are changing. We also know there are different types of teams. I actually spent some time yesterday with some folks from UC Berkeley that are doing some research on this, and there's different ways of sort of categorizing teams, but generally most of us know that there are products, there are project teams, you know, like we're going to spin up a team to, you know, look at our customer service, and we want you guys, we call them sprints here in Deloitte. You know, we want you to come back to us in 90 days and tell us, you know, everything we need to do to do better. So that's a project team. There are leadership teams. Leadership groups operate as a team. They don't always operate well as a team. They have unique challenges because they have to make very strategic decisions, and they also have individual responsibilities and accountabilities for their functions. There are service teams. When you look into a call center, it isn't one massive group of people. They're organized by problem area, by geography, by business area, by customer segment. Those are teams. There are obviously sales teams that operate and constantly changing their structure based on business opportunities. Here at Deloitte, when a massive RFP comes in or we have the opportunity to respond to a big customer need, we have to spin up a team of people to work on it, sometimes in less than a day or maybe 2 days. And then there are obviously product development teams who develop software, develop engineering products, develop manufacturing products, and so forth. Each one of those teams has slightly different characteristics. And there's been a lot of research on this. You know, maybe some of the more prominent research is the work that was done by Google and Project Aristotle, which they've put online. Teams need psychological safety. They need to know what their roles are so they can depend on each other. They want clarity. We want to know, you know, if I do A, somebody else is going to do B. And I'm not going to do A and then find out that somebody else is also doing A. They want to have personal relationships and meaning. And they want to know what the impact of their work is. In fact, one of the most exciting things about being on a smaller team, which most of you probably know, is that you can see the results of your work very, very clearly, and you get direct feedback. That's probably the most empowering and energizing part of work, when you see progress and you get feedback on that. And teams have a common goal, which is very clear. It's not always clear what the common goal is when you're part of a big organization. Now, I won't go through all the various research on teams. I'm going to let Samar talk about this a little bit from the standpoint of their research. But I want to highlight a couple things that we've seen, and this comes from research done here, research done at Google, research done at many, many places. I won't cite all the sources, but we do know that great teams are small. Yale, Richard Hackman at Yale was one of the pioneering researchers on this, studied, you know, airplane pilot, cockpits, and various different groups of teams, and found that the optimal team size is actually even smaller than you think. It's more like 5 or 4 people. It's not even 8 people. They spend physical time together. Proximity. People spend 2 orders of magnitude more time with people that are within 50 meters of their desk than they do with people that are online. So as good as online tools are, physical proximity is important. They need to know what their roles are, and they need to know what the goals are. If you look at the early implementations of Agile software, some of it really started at IBM and the Santa Teresa Labs. They defined very clearly the roles: a business manager, a designer, a documentation person, an engineer. They were very clearly defined so that people knew where their boundaries are and what their responsibilities are, and they can hold themselves accountable. They value expertise. The smaller the team, the easier it is to tell who's not contributing or who perhaps isn't capable or well enough trained in their jobs. And ideally, an organization would have, development tools and development culture to deal with that. In teams, you join a team because of your expertise, not because of your job title or your tenure or your level or how much money you make. The teams naturally are assembled based on expertise, which also is a form of the sort of the new world of organizations. They trust each other, they talk to each other, they get along. If you've read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, or any of the books on teaming, the culture books on teaming, they talk a lot about the need for trust, because the smaller the group, the more likely there are going to be conflicts, and the more important it is to talk about the conflicts. That's a big issue with teams. They learn from each other. You know, if you read the books on the military and how the military assembles itself into teams, and this is, Stanley McChrystal's book is really great, and there's others. They spend a lot of time on after-action reviews. Why did this fail? Why did this operation not succeed successfully? What can we do better next time? That's one of the characteristics of teams. They're diverse and inclusive. I don't need to, belabor you with all the research on this, but we've done research in Deloitte and recently just published some new things that show that diverse and inclusive teams rate themselves 3.5 to 4 times higher in performance than non-inclusive and non-diverse teams. That's internal self-assessment of performance. So that's an issue in assembling a team. And then they have tools. And this is where, I think we really land in HR. We haven't done enough work here. I mean, I've been, trotting around the country the last couple of weeks, really the last couple of months, talking to companies about this and asking them, do you have a team enablement group? Do you have team enablement tools? Do you have team assessment tools? Do you have team coaching tools? You know what? Most of you guys don't have that. We don't have enough of that in the HR domain yet, because this is the beginning of a new design of organization. Now, there are some cool things out there, and I'm not trying to promote anything in particular, but I just want to point you to some things to think about. One of the companies that I've spent some time with is LastUnit. LastUnit is a very successful software company, and their head of team enablement, Don Price, spoke at our conference last year, our research conference, and they put all their teams online. And they've learned in their environment, and it's very common in software to have small teams, that there are, some pretty clear dimensions to high-performing teams. And if you look at this particular model, which comes from the Atlassian team playbook, which is in the public domain, you can go find it online. Lots of videos and things on there about, how they manage teams and how they coach teams, is that quite a few of these are culture. The red arrows, I just tried to throw some red arrows in there to try to talk about culture. Culture is a big part of this. And when you go out and interview, team facilitators, team coaches, what you find they're mostly doing is they're not talking about structure and rewards so much. They're really talking about culture and how people get along and how well they get along. We published, our Center for the Edge, which is one of the research groups within Deloitte, published a really, really interesting report just in the last 30 to 45 days on how to move beyond process into practices. And the idea of that, it's a little bit of an abstract concept, but the idea of that is that high-performing companies today don't necessarily create end-to-end business processes like we used to. I mean, that used to be what HR and really business was all about. If we can make a process for this, then we can industrialize it, we can insert people into the process, and we can scale and be more profitable. That's true in an industrial organization, but when more and more of your business is focused on IP and services, it's less about process and it's more about practices. And what the folks at the Center for the Edge discovered, and I'll let you read through this, is that many of the practices that characterize the high-performing companies, the most innovative companies, the most service-oriented companies, are really cultural in nature. Being able to ask questions and looking at a problem with a fresh perspective, which is really what design thinking is all about. Understanding and committing to a shared outcome. Working together despite friction. Looking at new contexts and be willing to reinvent or reinvent the environment. I remember, one of the more interesting books that I read in my career, in my early days here, was a book by GE on reinventing GE by Jack Welch. And he has a comment in that book that, and this was a book written in the 1970s and 1980s when he was going through the restructuring of GE, and he makes a comment that, the most important thing in business is to see the world the way it is, not the way you want it to be. And that's actually a very hard thing to do, because over time you do have a tendency to develop groupthink in organizations. So understanding the real context of the world around you, which is a team characteristic. Moving toward action, getting things done, eliminating friction, talking about things that aren't working, and learning how to learn. Those are things that are not processes. You can't put a process in place to do this. These are practices or cultural attributes. And this is research that was done through interviews of dozens and dozens of high-performing companies by the Center for the Edge folks. So this is another example of how important culture is. So the last thing I want to sort of leave you with as I turn it over to Samar is this idea of culture. When it really comes down to it, regardless of what type of company you're in or what business function you're in, you're going to have to figure out how to assemble a team. And that isn't just going out into the job market and hiring somebody that has the right skill set, the right pedigree, the right college degree, the right experience, has worked for the companies that you admire. It's really a combination of personality and fit. It might have to do with age. It might have to do with experience. All of these are potential factors that could be bias factors or they could be reality factors. I just listed, 10 things that I know people deal with when they assemble a team. Some of them are proven to be important. Some of them are proven to be not important. But ultimately, they come down to fit. Do we have a fit? And in the teams that I've worked on and the teams we've had here over the years, it's interesting. Sometimes teams are incredibly, productive, and sometimes they're not, and sometimes it takes time for teams to develop. And so we need tools to understand what the appropriate fit is. Where do we have gaps in the team that we're trying to assemble? What is the difference between team fit and organization fit? And what is the role of skills and culture, and how does that all come together? So that's takes me to GoodCo. I was introduced to Samar. I don't even remember how we met. Samar and I met maybe 2.5, 3 years ago when he was starting this business to try to figure out how to crowdsource and socially assess organizational culture and individual culture. And as I looked at some of his early prototypes and what he was doing, I realized that one of the things that's going to happen with this offering was you're going to end up with an incredible tool for assessing and developing and bringing together teams. And so, I'm going to stop and sort of give you that set of context and turn it over to Samar, who's going to tell you more about what they've learned at GoodCo and share really what they've been doing in the area of team assessment, cultural assessment, and fit. So Samar, let me turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Josh. And you're very kind. I remember back in the day I think it was 4 years ago, when all we had was an idea. And as you mentioned earlier, the company's come a long way. And you've been very valuable in advising how the business evolves, especially the product. So thank you for that. And to everyone else, what I'm going to do is spend about 15 minutes showing how GoodCo is solving for culture fit. And then we'll save the last 10, 15 minutes or so for any questions that might come up. Just let me make sure if everyone can see my screen.
It's working great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So let's see here. So hello, everyone. I'm Samar Birwadker, founder and CEO of GoodCo. We're a small San Francisco-based startup. We've come a long way. And like Josh mentioned earlier, he's been helpful in advising us on how to build the next wave of products that use human capital and analytics to build stronger, more cohesive teams and company cultures. We're now spread across 5 different locations between the US and Europe, and we're recently acquired by one of the largest and fastest growing e-recruiting companies, StepStone, who really have helped power GoodCo's existing vision of quantifying culture fit, but primarily focusing on teams as a core currency of operation and helping use people analytics to build stronger, cohesive, more productive team cultures. So to start off with, I thought what would make a lot of sense was just share some very high-level findings from a study that we're getting ready to release, and they're all very aligned with what Josh mentioned earlier in several pieces of research. So in the process of surveying about 20,000 people, our team of scientists and psychometricians discovered several key insights, and all of it supported what we've kind of known all along. Each team has its own unique culture, and there are several factors that contribute to it, including lack of respect, team efficiency, adaptability are areas where managers and team leaders see most issues for why teams don't work. And again, this goes back to GoodCo's core philosophy of people join companies, but they leave teams and managers. And that's really what GoodCo's working towards solving, of reducing churn, right? And there are two ways of reducing churn, either helping people in existing teams work well with each other by learning and finding out more about each other's personality, work styles, attitudes, and behaviors. Or when you have that data, you can use the same data to identify what kind of personalities and skills will thrive in the unique nature of your own team. And we've also discovered that a work team is nothing more than just a group of employees, right? Work teams collaborate, they rely on each other to get things done. There needs to be a level of interdependence between team members, but also the micro cultures and team clusters that exist within an organization. Each person really needs everyone else to work effectively and solve problems. In short, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. I kind of want to spend a couple of minutes sharing with you guys the core beliefs on which GoodCo was created and why we took this consumer first, employee first approach before releasing our B2B products, which we're in the process of doing right now. Like I mentioned earlier, people join companies, but they leave teams and managers. Companies are nothing but a collection of microcultures that exist within a team. And while the concept of company culture is now mainstream, many organizations, unfortunately, don't have the tools and are far from adopting to this new reality. The reality is that people join companies, again, and leave teams and managers, and the internet in many ways has solved a lot of sourcing problems. In fact, even oversolved for them, but it's really difficult to now assess just based on resume and functional data, how someone is gonna thrive in this unique environment, which is your team. So we're spending more money today than we ever have before in hiring new people, but we're also losing them more quickly than we ever have before. And the idea of engagement, purpose, and values is really what drives a team's cohesiveness. I want to share with everyone a really quick, a minute-long video that will show you how GoodCo is approaching solving this problem. Right, so GoodCo's thesis is really based on a very simple idea. We want to create happier, more productive workplaces. Now, there are several research studies that substantively prove that when employees identify with someone at work, they tend to stay twice as long and are twice more productive. So since day one, our goal was to define what culture fit really means, right? Because everyone talks about culture, but the definitions vary. Our ping pong tables and free lunches and shuttle buses, your culture? Sure. I mean, there are tactical elements of your culture, but the culture is really defined by the people you work with every day. And the goal for GoodCo is to empower people, and that's why we've taken this people-first approach at solving this problem. So for the last 3 to 4 years, we've really built the science behind what culture fit means, both in terms of an individual or an employee, but also as part of a team, and the teams that are and companies that are a collection of different microcultures, which are teams. So with their consumer app, about over 2 million users have downloaded the app, basically to find out who they are, what their attitudes, motivations, and beliefs are, and identify what their quantified fit is with their coworkers, but also get insights on how they can build better relationships with their managers, their coworkers, and grow within their own career within the company. And in the process, GoodCo has become the largest psychometric database in the world, with over 60 million questions answered, 2 million employees on the platform. And through this process, when someone discovers something true, interesting, unique about themselves, they tend to want to know more about the coworker and identify how they fit. So GoodCo is able to grow virally within companies and capturing really valuable information from employees to help them do better. But at the same time, we've now created sort of the largest database of company cultures in a statistically significant way when we capture all this information from our users. And basically what we've done is we've used influences from social networks, dating apps, to gamify something that used to be previously boring and even esoteric like psychometrics, to turn this into a whole new dimension of data that hasn't existed before, but also allows us to use this data now to make more confident hiring decisions for what kind of people or which person or personalities and skills and traits are going to thrive in each team's unique environment. We're just now getting ready to release our B2B products with a set of early clients that have been huge champions for GoodCo. And I want to give you a quick overview of some of the things that our clients are using GoodCo for and the things that are coming down the road. So the Culture Showcase really is a way of us assessing a company's culture, or 360 analysis, and think of it more as a starting point. Because the GoodCo's consumer app gets very quickly adopted within companies with employees, it allows us to very efficiently dissect and understand several aspects of a company culture, and that becomes a baseline that allows us to introduce more sophisticated ways of using a culture to hire high-fit people, but also how to build a collection of strong, efficient teams. Then there's something called the Recruiter Report, which is really all about recruiters and managers when they're looking to hire people, identifying cultural traits of that applicant and using it to identify how they would fit in the unique culture of each team. But really, a lot of these features are now bundled within this product that we're getting to release called Team Dynamics. And really what Team Dynamics is about is allows you to decode the DNA of the team, but also assigns roles to each team member based on what the personality traits are, more importantly, relative to each other. So for example, a team of 4 people will have different roles that each person plays, but then it also allows you to see or simulate when you add a new person to the team, how those roles might shift, but also how that aligns with the overall long-term objectives and goals of the team itself. So think about it as something that used to be previously very esoteric and soft. What GoodCo has done over the last 4 years is quantified several factors of what creates a strong team and allow you to use these factors and cultural traits of your team to make better hiring decisions, or to also help your employees work better with each other to create happier, more productive, and sustainable workplaces. Similarly, we help a manager identify all these applicants and their impact on the overall team fit result, and then how they increase the diversity of thought and attitude on the team itself. And then on this dashboard, you can see an example of how multiple applicants, when they apply to, say, this product team, what their impact overall would be on the team itself. Also how they get along with their manager, which is really a deterministic factor for how successful someone's at work, but also how they increase the diversity of thought. So basically what we're doing is we've quantified previously esoteric factors like personality and culture fit, so we can use this data to make more confident and quantifiably informed hiring decisions. So whenever a new team member is added to this team, the overall dynamic can change dramatically, as you can see. And you can also simulate several different examples of what would work best. The last thing I want to share with you is a feature that is being heavily used by some of our early clients, primarily also clients that are using GoodCo to make high volume hires, for a specific role. So think about perfect profile is a data-driven analysis of your high-performing employees, and then we use the data to benchmark what makes, say, a successful business analyst in your company. And then every time you're looking to hire for a business analyst, basically you can assess the fit of a new applicant to your best case business analyst in the company. So this tool really gives you the power to replicate your most successful hires, helping you hone in on candidates that are perfect fit, not just based on skills, but also candidates that will thrive in your unique culture. And the last thing I want to share with you all is a recent quote from one of our biggest champions and really first early clients, which is Kelly Services, one of the largest RPO business in the world, alongside some other companies that have really allowed us to build GoodCo into an analytical tool for people and identify how you can build better relationships at work, but also use this data to predict what kind of candidates will have the right relationships with the unique environment of your team. And that's all I had to share.
Thank you, Samar. Challen, I think we have time for questions, actually. We have plenty of time now. Are people able to submit questions?
Hi, Josh. Yes, they can submit them via the questions option on the dashboard, which I'm not sure if you and Samar can see them, but I'm happy to read them to you. Do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing them.
Okay, yeah, I can share them. Do we have any questions from the attendees? If so, please share them in the questions box.
Let me just make a comment while we're waiting. When I first, there are many, many, many assessment tools in the market, hundreds. Many are from assessment companies, pre-hire assessment companies, testing companies, academics. I can't tell you how many books have been written on this. What's unique about the GoodCo business that I was sort of attracted to when I first met Samar is that it has the potential to be crowdsourced and get you massive amounts of data about your company. So, because you don't always know what the characteristics are of a high-performing team unless you look at it. I mean, we know certain things are true in all cases, but certain things are not true in all cases. I'll give you one particular example. There's a company that we've worked with for years that's come to our research conference multiple times, and they studied the highest performing product teams. And this is a company that's in the manufacturing business. They develop all sorts of things. Some things work, some things don't. And they tried to figure out what it was that the product teams that were most successful were doing. Were they more senior? Did they have more engineering expertise? Did they have more money? Were they larger? Were they smaller? Were they co-located? What was it? And they found that the most differentiating, predictable characteristic of the high-performing, successful teams were that they had more personal relationships and more enterprise understanding of how the company works than the others. In other words, this idea that you put a skunk works together of a bunch of people that kind of work in a vacuum, they found the opposite to be true, that in their company, the teams needed to be very savvy and very aware of how manufacturing, sales, dealer networks, research, finance, how the rest of the company works. And with that, it was that amount of that knowledge was really critical in the success. I don't think that's true in every company. I think that was unique to them. So anyway, just want to make that comment.
Thanks, Josh. We do have one question from the crowd. It is from Donna Paul. Does this training have HRCI and SHRM credits? I think that's for Samar.
I don't know if we set that up. I'm not sure if we set that up. I think we have to go through something with them and ask a certain number of questions. I don't think you're going to get credit for this. I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
And the follow-up question is, has this assessment tool been validated? Samar, I think you
Samar, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Some of our beta tests.
Yes. It has been validated both internally and externally. We'll be releasing a report around a validation in the next few weeks, including not just the validation for the assessment, but also the efficacy of the team assessment and modeling tool. And if you reach out to one of our folks at GoodCo, we can share some of that information with you.
Great, thank you. Another question, what are your thoughts on how to determine if an associate is a dud or if they are just in the wrong role? When to keep pushing or when to let them go? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll give you my comments. Yeah, I'll give you my comment on that, and then over to Samar. I would say, first of all, I think I read somewhere, and I don't remember where, that roughly 1 in 4 job hires don't work out. It's very common to hire the wrong person, more common than you might expect. And the way to prevent that is to use the tools like GoodCo in your own experience on who has been successful in your company and who hasn't, and go back with a sober, honest look and say, you know what, we keep trying to hire people that have this kind of experience, and that doesn't work here, and that is, you know, important. When you say the word dud, I have no idea what the context is for that comment, but it could be a couple of things. It could be that this person has not been onboarded or appropriately trained and coached. Nobody comes to work and is productive the first day. Everybody needs a certain amount of indoctrination, orientation, and training to get started. It could be that this person's skill set is inconsistent with the actual job itself. You would have to assess that. Or it could be that there's a problem in some of the areas that Samar showed you earlier of culture, that they don't have the, you know, the personality or the nature that your organization is made up of. I was at an organization last week in the Midwest. It was a very, very well-known, successful healthcare provider. And we were talking about culture, and you know, and it's a very well-known culture, and they get an enormous number of job applicants because they're so well-known. And I said, you know, how do I, you know, do you guys talk about your culture? Is it written down? They said, no, it isn't written down. I said, well, you know, one of the things that might help you with your hiring is write it down, create a document, a wall hanging, whatever it is, that describes your culture, and don't just bake it in a vacuum. Get it from the employees themselves, because the employees will tell you what the culture is, and that will help you better assess people. It's not always easy to do it algorithmically. I think GoodCo can help you with that, but that could be a characteristic too. So there's all sorts of potential things that could be behind that question.
Yep. If I may chime in on that. So there is no such thing as a magic bullet to quote unquote avoid duds, right? But I think the more data information you have pre-hiring to identify beyond skills, what are some soft factors that can be quantified and can be used to better predict someone's productivity and performance in teams or the workplace. And I think GoodCo is one data point that can help you make those decisions more efficiently beyond just looking at resumes and GPAs and skills and things like that. But also one of the things we've learned is that, well, there are some exceptions, but there's no such thing as a bad employer or bad employee. There's bad fit. And when someone is put in an environment without the skills, training, or the right kind of support, they're much more likely to fail. But also the people that they work with day in and day out, if they're not set up to have the right relationship with them or don't have the right predisposition to be successful in that unique environment, they're also bound to fail. So on the team dynamics and the personality and culture side, whether someone has a right attitude, approach, and predisposition to thrive in this very unique environment that's determined by the function of the team, the size of the company, the people that are already there, what their approaches to solving problems, all of these soft skills that can now be quantified and used as a competitive advantage. I think those are things you can use early on, again, to build more predictability in whether you're going to hire duds or not.
Yeah, let me make one more comment. Boris Groyberg, who's a pretty famous professor from Harvard, did a study of the highest performing investment bankers who made the most amount of money for the company and for themselves. And he found that when they left the company they were successful at, a very high percentage of them failed at another company. Same person. And what that tells you is that your environment is just as important as the individual. So it isn't just about finding this perfect person. It's also you creating an environment where they can be successful and you give them the support to be successful.
That's actually a perfect segue into our next question. You mentioned that the optimal team size is about 7 to 8. I know you also mentioned slightly smaller than that, around 5. But outside of the fit aspects, what are the essential roles, innovator, strategist, spokesperson, etc., that are ideal to make a high-performing team?
Well, I'll make one comment on that, and then I'd like to hear Samar's comments. I think it varies on the type of team and what the team's mission is, but I think the biggest thing about a team that's different from a hierarchy is teams are multifunctional. A team should be somewhat self-sufficient. I'm not saying they don't need support from the rest of the company for a lot of things, but in software engineering, for example, it's pretty well known that you need a business product person, you need a designer, you need an engineer, you need a documentation and QA person. Okay, that's an example. On sales teams, you need a lead account exec, you need product specialists, you need financial people, you need operations people. Each team by its nature will have probably different makeups, but the idea is that the whole concept of a team is that all the functions are in one place, and you're not saying, well, you know, we're going to go to finance for this, or we're going to go to this department for this, or we're going to do this. That's the old model. That's the old industrial model. I'm sure, Samar, you probably have some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot of factors that layer into what makes a high-performing team, but also what sort of roles, like you mentioned earlier, innovator, strategist, spokesperson, create the right mix for creating what we call the dream team, right? So teams are not static. They evolve over time. People evolve over time, and the dynamics within the team evolve over time. But also the goals that, for example, my team has over the next 2 quarters are likely going to be very different than the goals we're going to have through the end of the year. And the function of the team, whether they're a creative team or a customer support team, also is a really big factor that layers into that. But it really is determined by the multiple people that are already on the team, which is your biggest asset, the human capital that you have, right? And they also evolve over time. But the way we are solving for this problem is that can realize that teams evolve significantly and that their goals evolve. So for a manager, it's important to lay the objectives and goals for the team, say over the next 2 quarters or to the end of the year, that factored in with what the function and nature of the team is. So say, for example, it's a creative team, diversity of thought is a very important trait in a creative team. And you want to hire people that have that factor that can bring this team closer to the objectives over the next 2 quarters. But say you're running a customer support team and you know what makes a really good customer support manager in your company. And that's not something you want a lot of variety of different people playing that roles, but you actually want to replicate what makes a good customer support person in this environment. And that customer support person could be very empathetic, a problem solver, and have those traits. So like Josh mentioned earlier, there are several different factors that play into it. And that's what we're quantifying, or at least several of those factors we're quantifying at GoodCo through the team dynamics product. And then roles that people have on the team are also very relative to each other. So say I already have someone who's playing the role of an innovator, a mediator, and a spokesperson, but I simulate adding a 4th person to the team who actually is a lot more outspoken and a good representation of the brand than the previous person that was playing that role before, right? So when that person is added to the team, he may take on that role while also opening other roles that might be open for you to hire. So again, it's a complex model, but the more you're able to quantify and assess and use in terms of making better decisions with more data, the likelier you're to succeed.
I know we've got 1 minute left here, and since Josh opened talking about AI, I thought this might be a good one to close on. And before we do so, just know if you have additional questions, I know we have several in the queue here, please feel free to email me at challen@good.co, and I'll share the questions through with Josh and Samar following the webinar. So the last question is, are tools like this threatening the future of humans in HR? Who might know the strengths and weaknesses of employees on an assembled team? What are your thoughts on that, Josh and Samar?
Well, it's an interesting question. I wouldn't worry about it. Computers aren't as smart as you think. What they're really doing is they're giving you better hints and tips, but a computer is not yet, and I don't think it will ever be capable of actually assessing a human being and determine which human being is the best for a job. There's just a lot of personal and subtle things that we pick up in people. For example, I was going to think about this earlier. You talk to people's references. I mean, one of the things that I've learned over the years, talk to people that have worked with an individual before. You'll learn things about somebody that will not come out from face-to-face interviews or assessments. But what AI is doing is it's giving us insights that are more data-driven than we didn't have before. So a company like GoodCo's tool isn't going to tell you you must hire this person, but they're going to give you some ideas and some information that you didn't have before. So I'm not as worried about AI as other people are. In fact, I think the whole concept of AI is, we probably won't even call it AI in another year. We'll just call it software, and that'll be the end of that. Samar,
I couldn't agree more. I think this is directional, right? I mean, for example, I can speak to what we built at GoodCo is that it gives you more information on factors that you previously either didn't have enough data on or was very difficult to identify just through conversation. So it sort of quantifies certain aspects, but we're never going to tell you this is the one person you want to hire from the 1,000 people that have applied. But more importantly, we can say here are the 15 people or 10 people that have the right dynamics and traits that are likelier to thrive in your unique environment than like some others. So think of it as additional information and data that helps you make more confident and decisions with higher predictability than we were able to do before. I mean, frankly, we're not doing great now in terms of how long people stay in companies and how much it costs to hire them. So we can only go one way, which is up.
Perfect. At that, I think we'll close it. As I mentioned again, if you'd like to submit some questions following the webinar, please email me, challen@good.co, and we will be sharing the recording out following this as well. So look forward to seeing that. Thank you, Josh and Samar.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.